Hi, welcome back to the show. My name is Mikhail, hanging out here with Isai of Dakai. Isai, how are you doing today?
Hey, Mikhail, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. Amazing this lovely Thursday.
Hey, that positive attitude is the way to go for sure. It's definitely a great Thursday. And I'm so excited to be able to connect with you because, well, first of all, we've been connected for quite some time now. And, throughout I don't know, like over a year now, I've seen you develop your network tremendously. And now, as head of business development for Dakai in the United States, I wanted to ask you, like, what are some of your business development initiatives? Like, how do you go about developing relationships? And also a little bit about your current work. So I guess let's start with, what is it that you do?
Yeah, great question. And I guess in order to answer the question, I have to take it back a little bit, right? So I initially got exposed to the industry at its hype in 2017, buying crypto assets. During that time, my goal was very different than my goal is today. My goal was to make as much money as possible. And naturally, that led me towards some very, being green in this sector, this industry, and then seeing so much opportunity around you. It led me down some rabbit holes. Some of them weren't so good, and I actually lost a lot of money. But it was a great learning experience. I say that because now I see projects, companies, organizations, individuals, professionals in a very different perspective than I would have back in those days. And what I mean by that, it's like I'm super cautious. I like to ensure that whoever I'm doing business is someone that's credible. They have a reputation. I try to stay away from the anon projects, like good for them. Like hopefully things work out on their side. But for me, it's just not my strategy. And over the years since then, I started diving more into use cases. How can blockchain change the world? What type of adoption is necessary? Um, how do you solve problems from an institutional financial perspective to like a personal brand to a major brand, doing whether it's retail, whether it's fashion, and just trying to figure out which different directions this whole blockchain technology can evolve into. I started diving around 2021 probably, and then 22 a lot more heavier into the research side, to the point where I just could not figure out where to go to next, but I wanted more. I ended up meeting you somewhere around that time frame, and I think it was a blessing, right? Because I discovered very early on, like this whole world, it's all about who you know and your network if you want to build things the right way. And then just follow like the trail crumbs that are in front of you, right? Learn from the best, learn from people who are doing it, who are in your position in a couple of years. And through these relationships over time, I've been fortunate to, I was fortunate to catch wind of what the Kai Group was doing. And the Kai Group, what we are is we're a special ops development team. So we come in, we do software implementation, we integrate with our partner ecosystems, and we help them connect their product or their services to their customers. Sometimes companies don't have the resources to bring on their own developers, and they have to rely on third-party companies. And with third-party companies, it's hit or miss. You either got it or you don't. We've been fortunate to have our work show time over time with a strong reputation. And I think that has allowed us to just kind of integrate in the center piece of a lot of the strong ecosystems, strong partners that we have. And we're looking to expand, right? So that's what I'm doing now. I'm leading the US development efforts with the goal of meeting organizations who are funded to enterprise level organizations, identifying how we can collaborate, whether it's us doing development work, whether it's introductions, whether it's staying in touch and forming partnerships, co-marketing, things of that nature, with the end goal of providing more value to the ecosystem, continue to grow adoption. And with that comes more responsibility, but also more investors. And naturally, we all get to, grow out of that. So that's kind of my goal. That's a little bit about me. Hopefully, I'm not boring the audience, but yeah.
No, a lot of very interesting points. I want to approach this from a business development angle because that seems to be your expertise and just your ability to build a network. I'm curious to know, working with Dakai, they obviously have their reputation. They work with Spotify, I think Google, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of big names there. And so I imagine that paying for your services, it's not going to be cheap. I mean, we're not gonna talk on pricing because I know you gotta lead with the value, but let's just call it what it is, right? And so it's all about bringing the value. And so, first of all, how did you get their attention in order to get the job? That's my first question. And second of all, how do you navigate these waters when right now in these current market conditions, everything seems to be down?
Great question, right? And I think that's something that I've been fortunate enough to come into this industry with a non-technical background. And I say that because I have a different perspective on things. To me, relationships mean everything. I'm not an expert by any means in any particular sector, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's use cases. But what I do consider myself, it's an expert at relationships. I enjoy providing value where I can, and I enjoy connecting the dots. So if I take a step back, what I've been doing this past year, really like a year and a half, is building a lot of relationships. I've been so focused on relationship building that it's starting to unlock doors like joining Dakai. And if I take it a step back, the relationship started at a very micro level, right? It started with people who were looking at building projects. It started with engaging with some DAOs, and just trying to find my foot. And through these conversations, hopping on a lot of calls, at learning about what are some needs, what are people looking to do, how are they approaching the ecosystem, what strategies do they have in place. I learned that there's a lot of people don't have a strong sense of direction. So I made myself that glue of, hey, I'm this brand, I'm this company, or I run this project and I'm looking to do X, Y, and Z. I'm thinking, Google or ChatGPT is not going to help you here. I mean, I'll give you some ideas, but the reality is, I can help bring in someone who's done it before, someone who's vetted, at least from my perspective, where I feel comfortable enough to introduce, facilitate introductions. And I've been able to form a lot of partnerships between others because of these introductions. I've been able to facilitate deal making between companies, between organizations, individuals because of these introductions, and that carries its weight naturally. People start hearing about what you're doing. People start seeing the effects of being a dot connector in this middle of this chaotic world. I consider myself a beacon of light. That's how I like to look at things. Again, I just want to shed a little bit of light on the path. And over this past year, through relationship from working from the ground up with individuals at the very bottom, engaging in projects that led me to MVPs, to founders who were actually working on funded companies who received funded recently, and slowly but surely moving my way up into the enterprise side of things because of the amount of value. And even now, I'm not going to say I have all the connections or all the network in the world, but I'm fortunate enough to continue that path. And the Kai Group has opened more doors with enterprise level companies. I just got off a call earlier with the partnership team. We're discussing framework strategies. How can we provide as much value between both companies, developing a 90-day execution plan, all the way up to a year, so that we can figure out ways to work together, coexist, as opposed to just saying, hey, this is a partnership, we're signing a contract, and we're both going to get deals out of this miraculously next week. It's not going to happen. You have to put in the work. And I think a lot of that work, especially early on when I met the Kai's founder, it led me to building that relationship with him. And when the time was right and he saw what I was doing in the industry, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd love a chance to work together. And of course, by then, like I was like all for it. It's going to help me do what I want to do most, is continue to meet decision makers.
So somebody that works in business development is probably hearing this and saying, okay, Isai, like relationships is the way to go. Great. But I gotta make my quota, right? I gotta hit 100 people a day, cold outreach, right? Like you know that a lot of sales organizations operate this way because you need to have a certain process in place in order to fill the pipeline. We always hear about the pipeline, right? So talking to somebody like that, like, what do you say to them?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, right? Because you're working for an organization and you have their needs. What are they looking to do? Well, they want results, and how do you get results? You need to take action. And sometimes the relationship part of it is very difficult to quantify because the results are not going to be provided day one. So really, if you're in business development, you have a few different options to approach things. You can either build an inbound model, and that's very difficult because you rely a lot on marketing, on advertisement, on content creation, community engagement. It's work regardless of how you want to build the inbound model. You have an outbound model, which, let's be honest, I mean, we have email drip campaigns, we have, hop on DMs and automation there, and it's very unauthentic. And you also have the ability to nurture relationships, and that's the long-term play. You have partnerships, right? With partnerships, to me, it's like for most companies, it's the best way to approach things, but most companies do not approach it correctly. Most companies are looking at that quick win. And partnerships, it's an approach that when you mix it with your current model, when you identify from a 360 point of view, what are you offering? What are your services? Who's your target market? What type of individuals, professionals, companies have access to that market? How can you work together? Is there any overlapping synergies between both companies? And then starting to work on introductions, meeting them, discovery, identifying their goals, what they're looking to accomplish, forming a partnership, identifying that, negotiating it, and then setting up cadence of weekly, bi-weekly meetings. And it's not just to say, hey, here's an update on what we're doing, here's an update on what you're doing. It's what did we do since our last conversation? That's our actionable items to obtain, juice out of the lemon, whether it's a co-marketing approach, whether it's jumping on a podcast and talking together and interviewing each other, whether it's doing a demo and sharing it to each other's network via email blast, whether it's introduction to additional referral-based customers and noticing the trends, right? In the past 6 months, you've sent over 5 deals. Out of those 5, we won 1. This was a scenario. These other 4 didn't work for X, Y, and Z. Let's pivot and push more towards this way, right? You have to ask those tough questions during those calls, and that's what a partnership looks like, because you're not only gaining value of it, but then you're also figuring out what can I do as a company, as a professional with my existing network? Where can I connect the dots and give value back to the company? And next thing you know, you're the preferred partner, and now you're doing bigger stuff. And if you have 3, 4, 5, 6 different companies around you who are helping your organization drive up, it's a huge win. I'm saying this, in short, and I'm going to take a step back because I'm not an expert here yet, right? Like, I've done a lot of B2C over the years. I've led sales teams. I've led growth in different points. But when it comes to complex sales, depending on the product, on the offering, in the short period of time that I've been doing this, what I've noticed is that those are mainly the options, the different channels to take. And, what might work for one company might not necessarily work for another. But for us, partnerships right now there's a big opportunity, and we're going to continue to build strong partnerships, and we're going to be super selective of who we work with, because we don't just want to accept everybody that comes our way, right? And that's the other part of it. You don't want watered down partnerships.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to formalize something, put it on paper when really it's just all administrative, right? You need to have like an actual positive relationship. A piece of paper doesn't really mean anything if the person that you're talking to doesn't understand what you're doing and vice versa. So one of the things that I admire about you, Isai, is that you may not necessarily understand everything about what the other person's looking to do, but you're very curious. That's one thing that I notice. I see that within your LinkedIn post. When you have meetings, you almost do like a meeting recap within a LinkedIn post. I've seen you do these before, and I think most people that want to build relationships, they don't necessarily want you to know everything. They just want to talk to somebody that is curious and that is respected and well connected. That's ultimately the biggest value.
Yeah, you're spot on, right? I'm all about thinking about how can I provide value to my community, and I've tried a variety of things over the months. But what I've noticed is people like to get shouted out. Like, people like, and it doesn't have to be a crazy shout out. It can be as simple as like, "Hey, thank you for meeting." Obviously you need permission as well. You don't want to just start talking about something that was on paper as in an NDA. But you want to make sure you do that right, and then tagging people, people will come naturally. You won't notice it day one. But because your engagement doesn't always correlate directly to how many people saw your posts. But when people see your name consistently on LinkedIn, you start to build a form of authority. And what that authority looks like, it just depends on your content, the value that you're sharing. And next thing you know, you're hopping on calls and people are giving you props for those type of things. And you're like, wait, I thought it was not that many people like that post or engaged on it. So, but the good news is there is always someone watching, and I think that's another thing that's important for BD. Maybe start with one post a day, like, or maybe three a week. Just put it on your to-do list. It takes you 5-10 minutes. It can be a recent recap of the market. It can be a product that's coming out. It can be a partner update. It can be an update on your site. It can be an update on a recent call you had, a podcast, just something. And there's so many different things you can do. But I think it starts with just taking that first step. And most people are afraid to even just create. And granted, it's scary, right? There's a lot of eyes on you. You want to make sure you're doing things right. I've gotten my share of like, what is this? And if a post starts to go down, I'll take it off. It's not a big deal. I'll fix it, and then I'll focus on like learning opportunity. Next time I'll make sure to avoid doing this, but maybe I can implement this instead.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that putting yourself out there is going to be the best way for people to get eyes on you. I think it was Grant Cardone that said that people don't need to like you, people don't need to trust you, they need to know you. And
Yeah,
if you are, a good human being, of course, that obviously will help you in building out these relationships. But ultimately, it starts with people knowing you, and people won't know you unless you put yourself out there. And social media is a great place to do that. So yeah, definitely, I think from a content perspective, that's a good way to go. I also know that one of your other strategies, and I don't know if this is like a direct reason why you started this, but you also have like your own community of Web3 professionals, being that you are all about relationships. And you've added me to this community, which I'm extremely grateful for. And there's a lot of talented people there, very well respected. So I'm curious to know, like, what was the reason behind it, and how has this community helped you with your everyday life?
yeah, great question. So very early on, I started engaging in communities and trying to figure out which communities do I belong to. And what I found is I was gravitating more towards leaders just based on my history. I love working with CEOs, the C-suite. I love working with VPs, depending on the size of the company, directors, people who have the means to strategize and think bigger than just like, where am I going to get my next lead from? No offense against for business development, but that's the background that I come from. And I've been there, right? When you're thinking more on day to day, but when you start thinking strategy, you want to surround yourself with people who also think in that manner, who you can brainstorm, pick their brains. And it was very difficult for me to find a community that was engaged. And when I did find some communities that had potential, whether it was services, financial professionals, and right here, I'm going to give props to you because I joined your community recently. Thank you for the invitation. And I've learned something from you. It's like how you segment different rooms, right? Different channels, or I forget what it's called within the server, or whatever it's called. Um, but it wasn't always like that for me. I've always found communities where there were just like a bunch of people thrown into a room, and it wasn't even a community. It's just like layer one of someone clicked accept, and now they're in your group. So from there, I started thinking a lot about who do I want to surround myself with, strategists, right, decision makers, professionals, but then also companies that are vetted. And I go back to my experience with 2017, companies who are respectable, companies who are doing something greater for the use. They're not focused on selling 10,000 JPEGs, as NFT. Like someone who's legitimately looking at bridging that gap from the existing world to the future. And what I came out, and it has been difficult to build, especially at the beginning, gain traction, is decision makers of funded companies to enterprise level organizations. And I say funded because I have a certain, like, I still review some of the fundings and how much due diligence was involved and whether this is a big use case or a little use case. But that at least allows me to vet out, and no offense to the smaller projects, there's just a lot of insecurity, uncertainty with smaller projects. and it eliminates or reduces that risk a little bit. And then from there, as you gain a few core members who are like more active, and then you have some respected names, it's easier to leverage those, that network, when you bring on somebody new, and then you focus on providing value to them. I hop on calls with my community members. I try to figure out what I can do for them, and that has also helped in with the relationship portion.
Yeah, it sounds like, this is kind of like a double benefit there, right? You're building amazing relationships. You also know from a business development perspective exactly who your target is, and you're creating a community with those individuals that are kind of fit that avatar, so to speak, using a marketing term here. But it's almost like you're creating your own funnel, and I don't want to like take the relationship aspect out of it, but from like a pure sales perspective, you're almost creating your own funnel, building these relationships, and then some of them are converting into potential deals. And but at the same time, long term, like you've got these relationships for wherever you go. And I think that's the very powerful aspect of building your own community.
That's so key. In Web3, it's not about your track record on an individual basis as much as it is about who do you know in the industry. I've learned that very early on too. And I say that because 2 years ago, when I first tried to get into the industry, I was applying at like 50 jobs, 60 jobs, and all of them came back no. And I'm like, I have a ton of experience. At least get me an opportunity to get in front of you and let's talk things out. Let's see if I can help. But it's not about that, because especially if you're not technical and if you all you have is a Web2 background, it's also been the opposite of like, hey, I feel like now I know the industry a little bit more. It's definitely who can put you in the right situation, and you never know, right? Like that might open up a door for maybe a new job. It might open up a door for a collaboration, a partnership. It might be something as simple as advice. It opens up doors that and access to individuals and people that you wouldn't have normally. And that's my goal there, is to provide value. So that's what I do in the long run. Um, I, I don't want to just extract value from people nonstop, because then that makes you seem scammy, and people don't want to work with scammy people, right? They want to work with people who empower them, who make them feel loved, who make them feel inspired, who can provide more value. And I think that's just me in a nutshell, right? That's who I am naturally. And Web3, it's all about being authentic. So I'm my authentic self.
Building relationships, it's not easy. Whether you're in sales or your early stage startup, I think that especially for the founders, right? They're so passionate about what it is that they're building that whenever they walk into a room, that's all they want to talk about. But again, I'll take note that for you, you're always asking questions. Even when you and I got on a call, it was almost like a battle for who's going to be asking the question. It was a very refreshing conversation that you and I had, because you're always wanting to learn. It's that curiosity, right? And that's what builds trust, versus constantly talking about yourself. And we're all passionate about what we do, of course, and that's important. But even more important is to understand what the other person that you're talking to is working on.
100%. And you could add some strategy to relationship building, right? And I'll share a little bit of maybe insight. Something as simple as HubSpot, right? I know people have access to it on a free level. You don't have to be like, obviously if you're a corporation company and you have the enterprise level, great. But you can do something as simple as that. You add the people that you want to engage and grow relationship. You create a link with the most recent activity on LinkedIn, for example. You add that into the fields, and then you have a cadence. When was the last, whether I want to engage with people weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, and you reach out and you stay in touch. And when you reach out, you're not asking for things. You're reaching out to engage in their content. You're reaching out to ask them how they're doing, ask them if maybe you can do a follow-up call to check in on them to see what you can do to help them out. Maybe you're at seeing if they need introductions. And when you have this cadence, next thing you know, you have 100 200 people that you're engaging with on a monthly basis. And over a period of a year, I promise, like that is life changing. Because that relationship day one may have been zero. You know, maybe it was just someone that I wanted to get closer to. But after engaging on their podcast, on their Twitter, on their LinkedIn, I became the person that was showing up. I became more than a like a supporting person. And now they're like, okay, what can we do? Maybe this person can help me out in one way, shape, or form. Let's hop on a call. You know what? Like, what do you actually do? They'll ask you proactively, and that's when you know you're doing it right. That curiosity, that question asking will lead to people being curious about yourself. That leads to calls. Those calls lead to more introductions with actual deals. It leads to maybe it's a hey, they need work themselves. Maybe it's something completely different. But the strategy behind is follow up, last activity, next steps. What do I have to do to what kind of value can I bring back to them? And checking in on those things. Sometimes you'll hop on a call and you'll drop a task of some actionable item for you. There's definitely a strategy you can build around this. You got to be smart. You don't want to spend 8 hours a day doing that every single day because then the opposite happens. These are long-term plays, right? But that's a little bit on the strategy of things and ways that people can engage on building relationships.
Yeah, no, these are very important tips. I will say that any title with the word sales in it, for the longest time, I think we all shy away from it. And now the trend is business development, right? That seems to be the new title for salespeople. And I'm afraid that there are some people that are ruining it as well. I see some of these messages that are being sent out, and I get some of these forwarded to me. And I think we just need more professionals like you that are focused on leading with value. And you know, so kudos to you for what you're doing with LinkedIn, what you're doing with your community. It's been amazing to see, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Love it. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on. Can't wait to see how we can continue to provide value to each other.
Absolutely. So where can people follow along and connect with you, whether it be about Dakai or just, business development in general?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say LinkedIn for sure is my number one spot. And then eventually, if you're working on building a relationship with me, I might give you my Telegram, and that's where I'm really active. But LinkedIn, Isai, spelled Isai, last name Guerrero, Guerrero. You'll find me there. I think I'm the only guy with the pink laser eyes. I don't know if they're pink.
There you
Yeah, you'll
go.
find me there.
I'll be sure to include the link in the description. So Isai, thanks so much for sharing this. We'll have to have you back on next time and share some more insights into some of your strategies.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.